Hello, welcome. We're going to get started. I'd like to welcome all of you to our session today, From Local Government to Civil Society, From Urban to Rural Settings, Making Recovery Inclusive. And to our audience today, we'd like to start out by giving you all a charge as you listen to these 5 incredible speakers today. And we're still waiting. I thought that was my microphone. We're still waiting for one speaker to show up. So the charge we'd like to give to all of you today as you're thinking and listening to our presentations is to think about social change and institutional change. What will it take for us to achieve these goals of inclusive recovery processes? And as you listen to each speaker, we really hope you'll be saving questions based on those ideas. Today we have with us a set of, we should have 5 speakers. We're waiting for one person to show up. We have, and I'll introduce our speakers and then give you a little background on our presentation. Our first speaker today will be Mr. Kiyoshi Murakami, and he was born and raised in Rikuzen, Takata in the Iwate Prefecture in Japan, which was one of the areas hardest hit by the East Japan earthquake and tsunami in 2010. He's been serving as special representative of the mayor and senior executive advisor to the city of Rikuzen, Takata since April 2017. Kiyoshi, since we don't have name shields, can you raise your hand there? That's Kiyoshi there. He has extensive experience in human resource management for multinational financial institutions and also served as the Director of Human Resources for the UNHCR in Geneva from 2000 to 2005. His background came together when the disaster happened in Japan in his hometown of Rikuzen, Takata, and he was able to bring all of this tremendous experience from the international community, from international financial institutions to bear on recovery in Rikuzen, Takata. I think you'll find his presentation fascinating. He's also the president of Aid Takata, an NGO focusing on the reconstruction and development of Rikuzen, Takata, and you're going to find his presentation very interesting. The next speaker we will have is Mr. Shinichi Takahashi, the Vice Mayor of Sendai. There he is, since April 2018. And he also has had an interesting background in relation to the disaster that happened there in 2010. He was the Deputy Director of the Urban Planning Bureau from 2011 to 2013, Senior Director of that same bureau from 2008 to 2011, so immediately after the disaster, and in 2013 became the Director of the Post-Disaster Reconstruction Bureau. He started his career in 1980 in the Sendai City municipal government, so a lot of knowledge about that area that he brought to bear. Next, we will have the speaker we're waiting for, and I will introduce her when we find her. And then we have Professor Vinod Menon. Raise your hand. There we go. Our esteemed colleague from India was nominated by the Prime Minister of India as a founder member of the National Disaster Management Aid Authority of the Government of India and has the status of a Union Minister of State in the Government of India. He has more than 2 decades in the field of DRR, climate change adaptation, and public policy analysis, and is also an expert on disaster recovery, working through many of the different disasters that have impacted India. He is also a consultant to a number of different UN organizations, the World Bank and other organizations now, and a senior advisor to Sphere India, as well. So many fascinating stories that he will share with us, and global knowledge as well. And finally, we have Vijay Kumar from the Executive Director of the Global Network of Civil Society Organizations for Disaster Reduction here. Thrilled to have him with us today. This is the largest international network of organizations committed to working together to improve the lives of people affected by disasters worldwide. GNDR fosters a vibrant, active, collaborative civil society supporting people in their communities, particularly poor and vulnerable groups, to prepare for, mitigate, respond to, and recover from disasters and adapt to hazards in a changing climate. Vijay is particularly apt for this presentation and this panel today because he's a strong advocate of shifting power from the international system to community-led capacities, preparedness, and response facilitated by local organization. So this is our set of speakers. My name is Laura Olson. It's a pleasure to have all of you here with us today. I'm just going to frame a little bit our conversation and our topic today before we get started with our speakers. So we really took a strong look at the theme of inclusion on this panel, and we defined it as it's defined by the WRC, the fourth WRC here, as referring to the active participation of marginalized groups, attention to differential impacts and outcomes of disaster for specific populations, local needs, meaning privileging bottom-up approaches, and the need to build local government capacity wherever possible. What we are hoping to do today is talk about both the successes and the challenges we've had in achieving inclusive recovery. And you'll hear many examples. We've made strides in recent years in recognizing through our international frameworks the nature of marginalization, vulnerability, and impacts that can reverse human development gains due to disasters. But when it comes to being inclusive in recovery, our evaluations of current and past practice tells us we still have a lot to learn and much improvement to do. So this panel session plans to offer you, conference participants, an opportunity to discuss with us where we find ourselves today and what changes we need to implement if we want to really turn words into action and begin to be inclusive in our recovery strategies. So we see this as a call to action. I will now ask our first speaker to come up, and that is Mr. Kiyoshi Murakami.
Thank you very much, Dr. Olson, with the great introductions. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, this is my great honor to make a presentation of my experiences and our city's experience together with you all here. My name is Kiyoshi Murakami. I am a special representative of mayor and senior executive advisor to the city of Rikuzen, Takata. Now, where the city of Rikuzen, Takata, as you can see here, this is probably 500 kilometers north from the Tokyo. Actually, Sendai, the vice mayor of Sendai, Mr. Takahashi, is here. So Sendai is just nearby, but actually we are a little bit north from the Sendai. This is my city used to be like this. Together with the pine tree forest and also the white sand beach. You can see this is not like Japan, but this is one of a very unique area in this area, particularly with the white sand beach. And we had a number of tourists came, even more more than three times as much of the local population. Now, as you know, 2011, I want to just go through a little bit of what basically happens. I understand a number of people know what exactly happens in the 2011 disasters, but I just let me remind you this is what basically happens here. So this is the before tsunami happens in my hometown of the city of Rikuzen, Takada. By the way, city of Rikuzen, Takada is completely covered by the forest. 80% of all area is a forest in the mountains, and then also only less than 20% are flat area, so that people condensed to live and also operating their businesses and commercials in the flat area. Now, so just after the earthquake happens with the scale of 9.0. Actually, the March 11, 2011, around 2:46 p.m. So this is actually the right after 20 minutes after the earthquake. As you can see, the number of the houses are not harmed at all. So that most of the houses and the buildings in Japan is pretty much earthquake proofed. So that not much damage was made. Now, however, 3:25 p.m., the tsunami actually reached that area. And that tsunami was actually went over the seawall of 5.5 meters high. And then, as you can see, maybe on the photo, some people tried to get up, tried to escape and evacuate by the car in the lower end of the side of the photo you can see. So that is pretty much late from my view. So 3:26 p.m., 1 minute later, within 4 minutes, whole city was completely covered by the whole tsunami itself. And 10 minutes later, all of the buildings were gone. So this is the devastation and also danger of tsunami itself. It's very, very dangerous. So that's and then this is the city hall of my hometown, city of Rikuzen, Takada. The city hall was completely covered by the tsunami itself, but basically the 20 minutes after the tsunami hit, and then so that's the level of the water actually reduced. So that you can see some people are on top of the roof. That in this case, the city of Rikuzen, Takada lost the 111 city officials among 400 officials. So, and then some of the people on roof of the over there, actually including mayor himself. Mayor himself was elected as a mayor 3 weeks before this tsunami happened, and he lost his wife. So probably you have seen this one, Miracle Pine only survived, only one pine tree actually among 70,000. So that actually became kind of a symbolic for the reconstruction of the whole city. In Rikuzen, Takada, we actually lost about 1,800 people's lives among 24,000. We lost houses of 4,000 among 8,000. But this means that it's not only, we are talking about the households. So if we're talking about the buildings, it's over 10,000 buildings over here. And then displaced people, 13,500 people were actually considered to be displaced from house among 24,000. So it's more than half of the whole population were completely out of the house. No, nothing. They didn't have any drinks, waters, food, gas, anything. And no telephone calls, no electricities, no nothing. So this was actually lasted for almost 1 month for entire city. And also the certain area, actually, the certain area was actually continued without electricity for 3 months. So this is basically what happens even though developed countries like Japan. This is still happening, this devastated tsunami.
Progress in implementation
So this is the emergency shelter. Emergency shelter was not designed like this because that we actually had a designated shelter, but that shelter was also completely destroyed. So that's the whole of the people actually tried to get into the auditorium of the schools. So this is the night of that particular day. But also, from a few days later, of course, we received a number of the support from the studying from the self-defense force, the Japanese military. People actually came along to support us. But also, at the same time, the government tried to make various supports with lifelines and also foods and the waters. We had a number of also global supports. So temporary housing was actually built for those people who lost houses. So at the time of the 2011, we actually had almost 2,200 units for the almost 6,000 people. But at this moment, even after 8 years after, we still have 275 units for our serving to almost 700 people. Still, some people living in temporary housing currently. Now, I'd like to the reconstruction plan. From there, we actually had two phases of reconstruction plan. First one was the 2011 to 2013, together with we made a plan, and also we spent 2 years to come up with the consultation with a number of people, which actually included a number of the disabled people who do not speak any Japanese, or people with single mothers. So there are a number of different diversified people, so that we actually included for that. I'm going to go into that later on. And then also we put the the basic concept as the basis for the reconstruction. One is, of course, build back better. We really wanted to make a whole city being much better than before. Of course, the resilient city, and then also inclusiveness and accessibility. So we actually put this inclusiveness as one of the top priorities for that, the basis of a concept to build the whole city. So this is the plan for whole city. We actually built the pine tree forest and the beach, and then we created the city center, and by raising a land. We had to raise the land 10 meters high for city. It's probably maybe a city of the main area, main center area of this Geneva city. So it's almost same size that actually raised 10 meters high. Of course, we put together the seawall with 12.5 meters high. Now, on the 10 meters high elevated landscape, we actually opened up the shopping mall already. And then also how we do it, we actually had to cut whole mountains and deliver the mountain soils, and then elevated the whole area, and by using the world's largest conveyor belt. So transforming basic concepts into development. So as I mentioned, that 3 basic concepts now become like Riggs and Takada's global campus for disaster management that we actually developed together with the 2 universities, in local university and a private university in Tokyo. Of course, intended inclusiveness projects that actually taking place, tourism from outside of Japan, and new business with the innovation. So development of action plan, as I mentioned, I know I'm passing a little bit of time, but I just want to finish up here. So inclusion with the diversified groups is very, very important for us to come up with the basic plan and basic policies. As you can see, there are a number of the groups actually get together with diversified people here. Also, as I mentioned, that the global campus was created for disseminating our lessons learned to the not only Japan but also the rest of the world. Also, we conducted a number of the evacuation exercises together with people with special needs as well as non-Japanese. So city where inclusion is norm, that is our basis concept, together with a lot of local residents with children and students we discussed. And then Build Back Better is very norm now for our concept. So creation of new industries, we actually working on, together with the United States, to come up with the new industries of the pecan nuts tree we're going to develop. Also, we actually had establishing the international relationship or sister city relationship with one of the cities in California, which actually one of the ships or one of the boats actually wiped out by tsunami, reached to the California coast 2 years and a half later. So that actually created like a friendship with that particular city. And then finally, we are really focusing on the SDGs. So the city itself actually containing SDGs and also try to make the city as a model city, its host, model city of the Japan with the SDGs concept. Thank you very much. I know I took too much time, but I'd be happy to answer to your question later. Thank you.
So we're going to hold questions until after all of our presentations are done, but I just wanted to ask quickly, is Ms. Fatuma Awali Osman here? By any chance, we're missing a speaker. I just was wondering if she couldn't find us. That gives us a little more time, but I hope she will find her way to us. All right, thank you. And now, Mr. Takahashi.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Shinichi Takahashi, Vice Mayor of Sendai City. I'm very honored to be here to have an opportunity to speak to you all. Since the Great East Japan earthquake in 2011, Sendai City has worked with other stakeholders on restoring the livelihoods of disaster victims from different backgrounds. Today, I will explain how the city has promoted the activities. Sendai City is located 300 kilometers north of Tokyo and has a population of 1.08 million. At the time of the GEJE in March 2011, approximately 20,000 people lost their lives nationwide from the magnitude 9.0 earthquake and tsunami. The earthquake and tsunami also swept away and collapsed many buildings, leaving victims homeless. Local governments prepared prefabricated temporary housing and leased private flats for disaster victims who had lost their homes. Then, disaster victims could decide whether to move to disaster reconstruction municipal housing or to rebuild their houses with aid. To promote recovery, the challenge for local government was how to support the disaster victims in temporary housing and how soon to realize they are moving to new houses. This graph shows the year-by-year numbers of households who moved to temporary housing in Sendai City. More than 12,000 households lived in temporary housing at the peak. However, no household lived in Sendai City as of March 2017. This result has greatly contributed to achieving global target B&D under the Sendai framework. We believe that this success came as a result of the program for rebuilding disaster victims' lives, initiated by Sendai City. So now, I'll explain the details of the program.
Hafsa Ahmed from Sudan.
First, to assess the problem of disaster victims, we sent a survey slip to all the households in temporary housing by mail. In addition, we visit each household. The door-to-door visit enabled us to learn about the situation of various households. We would not have gained this information just by mailing the survey slip. For example, some victims found it difficult to indicate their intentions, and others were struggling to sort out their feeling immediately after disaster. We were able to assess the reality.
I wanted just to make a general comment about the link between the
Based on the information obtained through the door-to-door visit, we classified disaster victims into 4 categories. Category 1 includes households who have already determined the cost of home rebuilding and timing, and can perform their daily activities as well. Category 2 includes households who have already determined the cost of home rebuilding and timing, but need support for their daily activities due to health issues, for example. Category 3 includes households who can perform their daily activities but have not determined the cost of home rebuilding and have financial, employment, or other issues. Category 4 includes households who need support for home rebuilding and their daily activities. Classifying disaster victims into the 4 categories enabled us to provide support for their needs. For example, to the category 1, who can restore their livelihoods with less support, we mainly provide necessary information about restoring their livelihoods, including the procedure for moving to disaster reconstruction municipal housing. To the category 2, we continued door-to-door visits, provide healthcare guidance, and introduce other administrative services. To the category 3, we provide consultation about home rebuilding and employment. These different kinds of support designed for the various needs of disaster victims help them to move to new homes early. This program enables us to provide support to socially vulnerable people for early restoration of the livelihoods. I'm sure that this has greatly contributed to achieving not only the Sendai framework but also SDGs.
This is another challenge within our local context.
The different kinds of support became possible not just because of effort by the government, but also other stakeholders. In cooperation with various kinds of stakeholders, including NPOs, we are able to make door-to-door visits and classify disaster victims into categories. Some NPOs had provided support to needy persons even before the disaster. We are able to apply their know-how about employment and as support to needy persons in order to support disaster victims. These help us enormously to provide support according to the needs of disaster victims. The Sendai framework states that it's important to involve a variety of stakeholders in DRR and recovery. Our efforts to restore the livelihoods of disaster victims worked well, thanks to cooperation with many stakeholders. Our support program has been applied to areas recently affected by earthquakes and flooding in Japan. This activity is a Sendai model of Build Back Better. I hope that this Sendai model will be of any help for inclusive recovery, or no one will be left behind in times of disaster around the world. Last but certainly not least, let me introduce you to the World Bosai Forum to be held in Sendai City in November this year. This international forum will take place from November 9th to the 12th. Participants will discuss various initiatives based on the Sendai framework. A variety of stakeholders will join from Japan and abroad. For more details, please refer to the World Bosai Forum website. I hope you will participate in this forum. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much. That was absolutely fascinating. And we'd like to, our third speaker is not here. So I think we're going to move on to the fourth speaker, Menon, or Vinod Menon. Professor, thank you.
Thank you.
You're going to stay seated? Okay. I think he needs the clicker.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor and a privilege to be here. And I see some of the best minds in disaster risk reduction from around the world sitting in this audience. And I hope that actually whatever I will be sharing with you is based on my experiences in some of the good practices on disaster risk reduction and inclusive recovery. So what does making recovery inclusive mean? And we've listened to two representatives of local governments, and Shinichi-san, actually from Sendai, was one of the people who was there when the Sendai conference actually happened, when the Sendai framework was actually announced. And so Sendai and Riku-san Taka, actually, and Takashi-san, actually, I think we have two, exponents of disaster risk reduction from Japan, and we have two from India. It's just a coincidence that we have this kind of a mix of speakers. But I would like to share some of the thoughts in terms of what does it really mean by making recovery inclusive, and what is the role for local governments, civil society organizations, and in urban and rural settings. Vulnerable sections of disaster-affected communities, what does it really mean? In 2017, when we were actually meeting in Sendai, it was actually announced that, UNISDR mentioned this. No, this was actually in Cancun, in Mexico, when we were meeting in 2017. It was announced by UNISDR that disasters cost a global economy $520 billion annually. And world leaders were discussing solutions at Cancun in Mexico. And if you really look at the 10 populations most affected by natural disasters and natural hazards, extreme events, climate change-induced hydrometeoric disasters, it's India, China, Indonesia, United States, Bangladesh, Brazil, Pakistan, Japan, Mexico, and the Philippines. And if you really see the number of people who are actually affected by disasters, making recovery inclusive means, what you're seeing in the last picture. How do you really make evacuation decisions when you have thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people, and then when you have more than 1 billion people exposed to disasters in India? We are actually right now reeling under the devastating influence of Cyclone Fani, and we have had disasters like the Kerala floods. So we really go through disasters year in again and again. So we need to really understand what does it really mean when we are looking at inclusive recovery. So recovery can be inclusive only if there is a political and bureaucratic will to involve citizens and vulnerable sections in designing, developing, implementing, and monitoring post-disaster recovery interventions. Pre-disaster phases like preparedness and prevention, it's also called mitigation or disaster risk reduction, and post-disaster phases like response and rehabilitation have to be inclusive. And then only we can say that recovery is inclusive. All stakeholder groups recognize the differential vulnerability of vulnerable sections of disaster-affected communities. What do I mean by differential vulnerability of disaster-affected communities? If you're looking at the vulnerable sections affected by disasters, some of those people in the vulnerable sections are doubly disadvantaged or triply disadvantaged or multiply disadvantaged if they have many of the handicaps, which are basically issues like poverty, issues like unemployment, issues like disability, issues like exposure to terminally ill diseases, like cancer, kidney dialysis, or palliative care interventions. So we need to really understand the differential vulnerability of people who are the most vulnerable, most marginalized, and most excluded. Development planning processes incorporate disaster risk reduction interventions through consultative and participatory processes. Community have to be consulted, their views have to be brought in if recovery has to be inclusive. And finally, unmet needs of unreached communities can be addressed by all stakeholder groups, by the government, local governments, donor agencies, civil society organizations, and the media, and all other stakeholder groups, including the corporate sector, which are reaching out. We need to bring all stakeholder groups to address the unmet needs of unreached communities, and then only recovery can be inclusive. And what do we mean by vulnerable sections of disaster-affected communities? People with disabilities, also called specially able people. We need to recognize that they are also part of our mainstream. We need to bring them as part of the mainstream, and we need to address their concerns. Elderly people, women-headed households, palliative care patients, interstate migrant workers, scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, minorities, fishing community, adolescent girls, transgender people, and children. This is not an exclusive set of most vulnerable sections. You might actually add other vulnerable sections also, other categories, which we need to bring them so that, we understand that and we recognize that. In terms of addressing these, we would mention some of the good practices of inclusive recovery efforts. And we are very happy that, we have the representatives from Sendai and Iwate from Japan here. I would like to just recognize the Ibashwa Cafe. Margaret Arnold, who is here, the Ibashwa Cafe has come up in Ofunato in Japan. It has also come in Leyte in the Philippines. It has come up in Nepal. It has come up, and right now also we are talking about the possibility of similar such events. Recognizing senior citizens, elderly people, and their role in inclusive recovery. Peer-to-peer exchange with elders in Ormoc, Leyte in the Philippines. Community Resilience Fund established by the Wairo Commission and the grassroots women leaders in Asia, Africa, and Central America. We were there in the morning with with about 50 people who have come from different parts of the world, from 20 countries, grassroots women leaders, from Lebanon, from Palestine, from Cambodia, from India, from Philippines, from Guatemala, from Honduras, from Nicaragua, from Costa Rica. You have to really recognize that the grassroots women leaders are actually going to be influential in understanding the creditworthiness of people who do not have assets, who do not have, creditworthiness with the banks. You need to really make sure that they are included in recovery issues. Transgender delivery personnel employed by Amazon in Alapura in Kerala, transgender, the issues of transgender people. I must mention this to you, Kerala floods, actually there's a whole story about Kerala floods recovery when 1.4 million people were in 12,000 relief camps. 1.4 million people in 12,000 relief camps. And we have the story, we will also see a small film, a 4-minute film. We have the dolls, the Chekuti dolls. You please carry one of them with you as a souvenir. And this is also part of an inclusive recovery story. We'll be talking about that in a film, which is 4 minutes. Pokali rice farming in paddy fields below sea level in Kerala. Resilient communities as a multi-stakeholder platform. Gopi is here from Kerala, who is actually talking about a multi-country initiative on resilient communities. And finally, fishermen coming out in their boats to search, rescue, and evacuate 65,000 people in Kerala floods in 2018. I would like to just mention to you that this issue of, inclusive recovery, good practices, we have good practices from India, from Japan, from Nepal, from Philippines, from Guatemala. We will actually be showing some of those things. The two people whom you're seeing on a motorcycle are transgender delivery boys from Amazon, These people are being employed now in different livelihood restoration opportunities. You have transgender people working in the Cochin metro. We have, the Chekuti dolls, which we have just mentioned. You can carry them with you. And the middle one is about the people in Nepal talking, the Japanese people talking to them about the Ibasho Cafe story. The last picture on the ground bottom is the garden, vegetable garden in Philippines, in Ormoc, in Leyte. So these are some of the stories, actually, of good practice interventions. And next, please. Inclusive recovery, good practices. Again, we have Pokali rice farming, which is an experience which we have shared here. And the Chekuti dolls, we have Gopi and Lakshmi. And thank you very much for this opportunity, and we hope that we will actually be able to interact with you more in terms of the opportunity which is there with us. Thank you very much.
Professor Menon, would you like to give a short introduction of the film we're going to see right now about the Chekuti dolls?
Okay. This film which you're going to see is a 4-minute film on the story of these dolls. These dolls have been made from upscaling the handloom saris which were damaged when 12 feet of water for 8 days was there in Kerala. So we will actually see this film. These dolls have been made in 9 countries by grandmothers, by women, by school children, and by a lot of people. And then, you'll be carrying one of them. Please watch the story. Thank you very much.
And if you can upload the film, Gopinath is here with us, who worked on this project, and he brought one of these for each of you, which is on the table on the way out.
In Chennamagalem, the weaving community of more than 300 families saw their livelihoods washed away. Looms, properties, stock, drowned under the water up to 12 feet deep. Piles of stinking soiled clothes lay strewn behind the weaving units and along the village road. Where most saw devastation, social entrepreneurs Lakshmi and Gopi saw opportunities. This is where the story of Chikutis began. Through crowdsourcing 50,000 volunteers in 9 countries, upcycle the ruined clothes into 120,000 plus Chikutis. $360 out of each worthless saree. Selling the Chikutis raised the much needed funds for the weavers. They also captured the mood of the time. A beacon of resilience and solidarity shown by our people during the flood. This child from the village of Chennamagalem was someone we all could relate to. It had scars, it had stains. It didn't pretend another perfect world at all. It was us. They are used as gifts, decorations, luggage stacks and lanyards. As workshop tool for children affected by trauma. As a memory to hold on to. As a reminder of the height to be reached as a humanity. The Chikutis are still young, but they are growing, sharing new stories of supporting the underprivileged with dignity, and telling the world that Kerala isn't just only God's own country. It's also a land of Chikutis. Because this isn't just a story of one village, it's the beginning of 35 million stories, all from one place. A place called Kerala.
So,
Can I just take 1 minute?
yes, please.
I also want to just mention that a new program, an international master's program on compassion, peace, humanitarian action, and disaster risk management is being conceived. And the Vice Chancellor of the MIT World Peace University is here. And we hope that this program will actually help us to bring more and more young people understand inclusive recovery. It will be addressing compassion, peace, humanitarian action, and disaster risk management. And we will actually be very happy to interact with any of you who are interested in this program. Thank you very much. And Gopi is also here from Chekuti.
I was just going to ask Gopinath Parnil, will you please stand up? Who brought? So there is a Chikuti doll for everyone to grab on the front table as a souvenir. And we thank him for that.
Thank you.
All right. And now, thank you for that wonderful presentation. We'd like to ask BJ Kumar to give our final presentation on this panel.
Thank you, Laura. It's really great opportunity to be part of this, but then I realized that talking after Vinod, from whom I learned lots of things, I've seen him, and after fascinating example from Japan, it is an advantage and also a huge disadvantage. Because I don't have anything to say, everything has been already said. It's great. I just
I just actually wanted to share few thoughts. Apology, I don't have a PowerPoint, but I will try to articulate and share some of my perspectives, some of my questions that has come to my mind from time to time. In 1999, I was in Odisha. After the super cyclone of 99, official figure of death was 10,200, if I still remember, but which was contested. The death were almost 3 times is what people talked of. And I actually went I was responsible for that area. I was working with ActionAid, an international organization, but we were working together with the civil society organizations there. And I reached there after 24 hours. And I was literally paralyzed. Let me just tell you, I was literally paralyzed when I saw hundreds of dead bodies around me. I didn't know what to do. And there, like me, I'm sure, many who went through that process, we actually wanted that the casualty and death and mortality has to stop. People don't have to die. Cyclone don't kill people. We kill ourselves. So that is what we started with. And when I see now in 2019, Foni with a speed of 210 kilometers per hour killed, I mean any death is regrettable, but still killed around 60 people. That is an achievement. And that achievement that we need to congratulate the collective efforts of civil society, local government, the provincial government, and private sector. This is a fascinating and amazing work that has actually contributed in reducing the death. But having said this, I wish in 99 we had the opportunity, we would have the opportunity to listen to 2 fascinating presentations by Japan representative, Takahashi and Kiyoshi. It's fantastic, fabulous. I wish that I would have listened to that. What we didn't do that time, we didn't actually, when we were talking of reconstruction and recovery, we didn't take into account 3 things. I'm not sure we took it into account or not. 1, a risk-informed infrastructure building. When I now see, I talk to my family relatives who are there, I see only devastation in Odisha. A risk-informed infrastructure building could have saved that. Simple thing like underground cable for electrification. Simple thing could have actually saved. Not imitating Bangkok or London to make an airport, which if you see this, it doesn't have the roof anymore. So like say, we could have actually thought through a risk-informed infrastructure building. That's the first thing. Second thing, I still remember we actually talked of the analysis from the perspective of the communities who were disproportionately impacted. They were persons with disability, they were the particularly the untouchable groups, which are the Indian caste system, the lowest categories of the caste systems, the women, the children, they were disproportionately impacted. We started thinking from their perspective. We did take sides with them. That is another form of inclusion. But the challenge is that needs, as Vinod was talking of, that needs quite a bit of political will. It's a shift of the thinking and power itself. Disaster seems to be seen to be impacting everybody. So whenever the disaster response happens, the upper elite section absorb most of the responses, the benefit of response. I was responsible for the tsunami response. In 6 months, the hotels which were down in Sri Lanka, in Thailand, they were up running. But the poor people who lost their cottage, they still didn't get after 3 years. So when you are talking of reconstruction, then you need to be careful that we are taking on board. Now, these are the 3 things that I would have thought of that we could have taken on board at that point of time. And now perhaps I would still plead all of us, whenever you are talking of disaster risk reduction, whenever you are talking of reconstruction itself, or recovery and reconstruction, it is need to be a political process which needs to ensure there is a shift of power and entitlement for the people who have been impacted the most. Now, let me come to the second part. Now, another critical thing, we have these silos of Climate Convention of 2015, Paris Convention, then we have Sendai Framework, then we have SDG, then we have Humanity, Agenda for Humanity, lots of these silos. Now it is important that we should start looking at how we can bring them together. Because for the end of the day, for the person who is impacted by disaster, for that person it is the same life. It doesn't divide in silos. So there's an attempt in Philippines, I'd like to actually quote here, is Cabiz, a city in Philippines, where Tier Fund is another international organization. They actually initiated a process. They started working, bringing the disaster risk reduction or risk-informed processes into SDG, into climate change, and started working in the urban areas and try to see how they can actually bring it together, and started coming up with a 5-year project and try to see how that integration happens. This is what was critical, and now if you go to that city, is resilient, where community made a plan, government supported that, local government was involved, private sector was involved, that was supported and resourced, and they could actually be more resilient, and they got an award. They moved from 214th rank to I think 14 or 15 rank within Philippines. So that is a possibility that we can actually do it. And when we are doing it, that is critical that we actually look at it from a longer term perspective. There is no short term fix of a disaster response. Haiti taught us, Odisha taught us, Philippines taught us, Nepal taught us, we cannot go for a short term fix. That we go there, do a quick response, and then actually, because of the time requirement for involving the human beings, because it requires time. It is a time-consuming and quite a labor-intensive process. We just simply take it off and then start putting money and build the infrastructure, so that we can actually finish it in 3 months, 6 months, 8 months, 1 year. It doesn't stay. But even if it is time-consuming and labor-intensive, cost-intensive process, it might be more useful to see how those communities are leading the processes, designing, are getting involved in the designing, and trying to see how that can be actually done together. I was just thinking, I was told by my friend that my time is up, but I just actually wanted to plead, I wanted to appeal to all of ourselves that we can come together. We can come out of our DRR, climate change, climate communities, development community, rights communities. Instead of doing that, can we actually come together, work together? It is an all society response. That's the only way forward to transform the life of the people and make this world a world free from any form of disaster. It is possible. And I'm absolutely hopeful. Might not be, I'm old now, not as old as others, but I might not see this in my lifetime, but I hope my daughter's daughter will see this. That is what we need to actually commit and work together to achieve. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot for giving me time.
Could you put up the first PowerPoint, please? The opening. Thank you. So I'd like to frame our discussion a little bit, and I have a question for our presenters, and then we will open this up. Excuse me.
Yeah, just come up.
Oh, it's come up. Oh, great. So, so I have a few cartoons to kind of frame our conversation and help you all think about some of the topics. Disaster relief. Oh yes, thank God it's a panel of experts. What does the term expert have to do with the notion of inclusiveness? I'll leave you with that question as, and show this other cartoon that I think is so wonderful in relation to our topic today. You see the decision makers up in the tower and the people outside around the bottom saying, how can we make our voices heard? So the notion of inclusiveness and what we'd like to talk about as we move on to some questions here is the idea that participatory processes are messy, they're difficult, they're time-consuming, and we often hear a lot of pushback on why we don't have time to do them, why they're too difficult, why they might hold up the process that we're undertaking. And certainly recovery tends to be, and is actually, a very top-down process in many ways. What we're talking about today is how to make this a more bottom-up process, how to kind of flip the agenda and how to go from talking about this to actually doing this. So we've had some examples from our speakers today. But I would like to just leave you with 3 more comments before we launch into these questions. We have some key terms we use. Stakeholder itself is a term. Who comes to the table? That tends to be those decision makers. People who have access to assets, they have resources that are needed or technical capacities, but they aren't the people down on the ground outside of that tower. So we want to think about that as we move into questions here. That question of the concept of expert and beneficiary. Beneficiary is someone on the outside of the process receiving the benefits of that process, but not directly involved in it. Okay, so we're going to launch into some questions, and I'm going to give one to each speaker very quickly. For Mr. Takahashi, Sendai is very proud to have their name in the Sendai framework for DRR. Can you talk about how having this document named after your city has changed your local government's attitude towards DRR and recovery? And in terms of inclusive processes, how do you feel about being a worldwide role model?
Can I answer in Japanese? Is that all right?
Yeah. He'll be interpreted.
今のご質問にお答えしますが、まず仙台市の状況については先ほどご説明しましたけれども、将来の今災害あるいは気候変動に備えた防災環境都市を目指したまちづくりを進めてございます。でその特徴はインフラなどのハード面だけではなくて、防災の担い手となる、市民の育成、あるいは次の世代を担う子どもたちへの防災教育、これなどを一生懸命進めているという状況です。それから東日本大震災からの経験から自治体が市民に提供するいわゆる公助だけではなくて、市民自らが自分を守る自助、それから地域の市民が共に助け合う共助が重要であることを仙台市民も強く実感しております。いずれにしましても仙台市としては仙台防災枠組みが採択された都市としてこの枠組みに基づく防災減災の取り組みを進めて世界へ共有する役割を果たしていきたいと考えてございます。
I'm going to answer those questions. So as I explained in my presentation, the measures that we have taken focus not only on hard defenses and infrastructure, but also on nurturing people's ability to deal with disasters by training citizens who take charge of disaster prevention operations, and also educating children who will bear responsibility for the next generations. From the experience of the Great East Japan earthquake, Sendai City and its citizens strongly felt that along with public aid provided by local and central governments, self-help, whereby citizens prepare themselves for disasters and mutual assistance, involving the idea that members of a community help each other, were important. And Sendai has now incorporated the ideas of self-help and mutual assistance in the community disaster prevention plan. And this concept I thought was worth sharing with you. And Sendai, as a city where the Sendai Bosai framework was adopted, will actively promote initiatives to prevent and mitigate disasters based on the said framework and fulfill the role in sharing our knowledge with the world. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question now for Mr. Murakami from Rikuzen Takata. In your role as special representative of the mayor and special executive advisor for the city of Rikuzen Takata, you supported a smaller-sized rural town which was devastated by the tsunami and provided critical links to entities outside of your outside the area of impact in Tokyo, other countries, within international organizations. You advised on policy design and critical steps for a successful response and recovery. Based on your experience and what you learned, what kind of advice and support do you think is essential to the leaders of any local government hit by a catastrophic disaster? And how can we deliver what we most need in order to be effective? How do the needs of local governments differ from those of larger cities, and how can we properly prepare to support these needs?
Thank you very much for our questions. I understand this is a very long questions that I can ask. I can respond to that. And but before responding to these questions, I really appreciate those the presenters and distinguished guests from the India pointing out that Japan, and also particularly Dr. Menton talking about the Ibasho house, which is actually next. That is in Ofunato City. Then next door. But by the way, I went to the Ofunato High School, so I know where it is basically. So, but anyway, so to respond to your questions, actually, I am a special executive advisor to the city since 2017. But however, I heavily involved with the city's recovery processes from beginning. So, for instance, 6 days after the devastation happens. So at that time, I didn't have any positions whatsoever. I only carried myself as the goodwill ambassador from my city. So that is only the capacity that I actually had. So what basically happened is that with my previous experiences, as you mentioned about my background, I was working as investment banking in such as Goldman Sachs or Citibank or JP Morgan. And then also sometime I was working at the UNHCR here in Geneva. So that's I had a little bit of network with in private sectors as well as the government sectors. So and then also looking up that after that whole city once I saw the whole city, it's completely out of the control. In other words, the whole city they didn't have any. They didn't even think about how to find out their needs are. They didn't have any capacity whatsoever. They really wanted to have somebody have to come in to help them out, because that all of the the city officials or governments itself were actually become victims as well. So that they didn't have any capacity to do anything. So the only thing that however, the mayor himself, I 6 days after, I start talking with them. And I make sure that what we need to do is that we completely needed to have thinking about the complete, integrated process to rebuild the whole city. And of course, first is that how we can survive, we can recover the survivors, how we can help out. So that's actually from my view, my experiences in being in the private sectors and also the UN. I used that number of the network, talking with the cabinet office first, and then also talking with the deputy ministers of the at that time to make sure that this is what we basically need. So that's the first thing is that we really want to have, of course, the basic needs of the waters and foods and all those, but at the same time, we really need to have temporary housing because people are, refused with the different locations. So we really wanted to have the temporary housing from beginning. And so that's why I really demanded. So with those, the exercise was actually conducted with, of course, the important thing is that the mayor himself is very, very, flexible to listen to the other people. And he himself was, of course, needs, because he was also victim too, because he lost his wife, he lost everything. He had to take care of his two small sons. And he also being a victim, and then he really wants to do something, but he knew that he didn't have the capacity to conduct by himself. So only thing he really wanted to do was that to listen to other people, to try to get everybody get involved, to support. Of course, this is of course, he really needs to discuss with the central government as well. But they make sure that he knew he really wanted to do something beforehand, before he asked the government. So those type of the flexibility is very important. And the secondly, I myself also had to conduct the communications of all of the people, because we had no telephones, no TVs, no broadcastings. So what we had to do was to communicate among people. So I had established an emergency radio station, which is new to the radio station in this region. So this radio station was broadcasted all of the information that we really needed to have. And then also another thing was we also received integrated, comprehensive support from one particular big city called Nagoya City. Nagoya City actually sent us the total of 50 people of the city officials to the city of Rikuzen Takada to conduct whatever they needed to do. So that usually people in the city actually said, yes, we do need this type of help, we need that help. But rather than that, we basically accepted that all of the integrated, holistic support from City of Nagoya send us, so that they actually conducted whatever they feel that is necessary for the conducting the whole city. Those type of the arrangement actually made. That is called in Japanese is the marugoto shien, which is more like I would say the integrated holistic assistance by the city government of the big city of government. So we are a very small city, so that the big cities actually really supported us. Is one of the area actually. Even though it's 700 kilometers away from the city, they came down. We still have one of those people.
Thank you. I'd like to open this up, and I will open it up with one final question for our last two Professor Menon and Bijay Kumar, wondering if you could reflect on root causes for the lack of inclusive recovery interventions and your insights about what would empower those leading recovery to improve practice and increase inclusiveness. And I'd like to also open it up and collect a couple more questions from the audience. Please.
Hello. Thank you very much for very nice presentations. I'm Guru Nayak from Afghanistan Resilience Consortium, so I have come from Afghanistan. I have two questions. One, of course, to the first two presenters, and that is relating to the city in Japan, the Riku Jantata city. While the presentation was going on, I was wondering, even a country like Japan that faced this massive disasters, which is, if we think of similar disaster in Afghanistan, we would probably take like 300 years to recover, but they have recovered so quickly. Japan is a island country, and it has several cities, probably which are also vulnerable to tsunami. Here they rebuilt one city, and they have even raised the height of the city so that they have built the city better so that it's probably safe from other future potential tsunami. How are they really, doing the same for other cities, other coastal cities in Japan, which is also, prone to tsunami in future? So I'm just trying to understand how a wealthy country like Japan is preparing for a thing like tsunami for other cities. My second question is actually to Vijay. I also come from the same state that he talked about this cyclone Fani in India. And, one of the things that we are talking about in this inclusive, not just recovery, he actually talked about inclusive evacuation, where the government actually evacuated 1.2 million people. So which essentially says that because of this massive evacuation, lives of 1.2 million people were saved. But at the same time, I think probably people don't know, there were 3.4 million livestock were dead. Okay, so while we are talking about inclusive evacuation, we have made so much of plans for evacuating human beings in the case of cyclone, but we actually have lost 3.4 million livestock, and I don't know how many lives it will actually impact, and how many years their livelihood will require to be supported. So I think when we talk about preparedness, like evacuation, I think we should also talk about livestock and other very important lives that we lose.
Thank you. Sarah?
Thank you, panelists. I'm Sarah Henley-Shepard with Mercy Corps. I'm just curious if any of you have, and if you could speak to this, incorporated active preparedness, response, mitigation, and adaptation in your recovery planning, particularly relevant for those of us who work in protracted crises, places affected by in-transit conflict, as well as places that you might start the recovery process and they experience another flood or hurricane. So if you could speak to that, thank you.
Okay, two more, and then we'll move on to answers.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Ajay Kumar. I am from India. I'm representing National Campaign for Dalit Human Rights. My question is to both Vijay and Mr. Menon. Yes, all these frameworks, so whether it's the Sendai framework, whether it's DG, and we're all talking about inclusive DRR. But time and again, we experiencing the exclusion is more or less happening everywhere, in every time. So do we have some outcome framework which make sure the structural forms of exclusion, like caste, especially in the context of South Asia, otherwise we keep on talking about the ideas and we don't measure the outcomes. So any ideas, any suggestions?
We're going to answer these, and then we'll go to the next. Go ahead. And please keep your answers brief. We are at, our time is almost up here.
The city of Sendai has 3 key terms when it comes to tsunami risk reduction. First, multiple defense measures. Second is evacuation. Third is relocation. この3つで守ってますという。
So we defend ourselves with those 3 ideas, with those 3 elements.
Yes, for just follow up with the Mr. Takahashi mentioned, I think that's answering to the colleague from the Afghanistan. I think Japan has been very much aware that what we had a number of lessons learned from our experience in Tohoku or Great East Japan earthquake and tsunami itself. So that's the reconstructions and also how we evacuate the peoples, and as Mr. Takahashi mentioned, there's a number of the mottos, and also those the basic concepts that were basically shared with all over the city governments in Japan. But also same time, they are really working on same time to make sure that how we mitigate people when things happens. So that they actually learn from our experience, and sometimes even our city officials are actually sent off to the disaster area so that they actually conduct to support the disaster affected area in case of Kumamoto or Hiroshima when we had the flooding and also earthquake in Hokkaido Island. So all those the experiences were basically shared, and then also the central government has been really focusing on the make sure that all of the lessons learned being shared, and then also develop their new strategies and then also the projects for protecting their own people and also their material goods as well.
PJ and Professor Menon.
Thank you very much. I think there are many important questions coming up, but Laura, you asked this question about what are the root causes of inclusive recovery not really happening, and what are the root causes for that? I think we need to understand that in most countries around the world, facing natural disasters, extreme events, and climate change-induced hydrometeorological disasters, the dominant power dynamics is something which we see in all countries. And how do we really address the dominant power dynamics is one challenge. And that's there in the government, it's there in the elected representatives, it is there in the minds of agencies which are actually also distributing funds. The equations that the reality that a perception from most of these people who are actually sitting on high seats of power that the disaster-affected people are a hopeless and helpless liability, and there is a donor fatigue. There is also a feeling that nothing is going to happen because this is actually going to happen again and again. And what do we really do? And these are people without jobs, without assets, without opportunities, and whatever we do is not going to really help. And that attitude, I think, we need to really address very, very clearly. And we need to understand that disaster-affected communities are not liabilities. They're actually an opportunity to really understand that they can become an asset in the whole process of recovery. And how do we really do that is a challenge. And understand that they're forced to do distress sales of assets, distress sales of livestock, distress sales of land, because there is no opportunity. They don't have any option. But if we can actually involve them in decision-making and make them participate in this whole process of making recovery inclusive, I think that is what is possible. So how do we really do that? And how do we make people a part of the process. I think one way to do that is to ensure accountability to affected populations. We need to have an accountability framework. Ajay, actually, you are right. We need to have an outcome framework, but outcome frameworks have meaning only when we have an accountability framework. We need to make everybody accountable, all stakeholders accountable, governments, elected representatives, donors, banks, corporates, media, civil society organizations, community-based organizations. Everybody has to be made accountable. And so an accountability framework can only make this whole question of leave no one behind a reality. And inclusion is affirmative action. And how do we really make affirmative action? And that is a challenge for all of us to really work together. And finally, I would like to also say that we need to have improved data. Right now, we are talking with a lot of assumptions about data. We really do not know who are the people who are affected. And we are having forgotten disasters because we are actually doing certain things, but that is not really reaching the affected communities. So we need to improve our data capture. We need to understand who are the people who are affected. And finally, we need to also empower people by ensuring that they have titles to land. In most countries, Nepal, reconstruction has become a difficulty because they do not have titles to land. This is the same thing happening in many countries. We are actually dealing with this whole crisis of not being able to address this problem of land ownership. We need to really come up with solutions, which actually we have to have smart solutions. And I think all of us need to contribute to that process. And finally, we need to also consult the vulnerable communities. It has to be participatory. We need to listen to their voices. And if inclusion has to really become a reality, we have to listen to the people. And I think that is the only way in which we'll be able to really achieve results. Thank you very much.
Just actually, perhaps I might be repeating or underlining some of the things that Bino said. Let me start with what Ajay you were asking. One of the key things that was talked of in Sendai framework is resilience, strengthening resilience as an impact, or you can define it as an outcome or as an approach, depends on how you want to see this. And resilience is also underlined in 2 Sustainable Development Goals and 8 targets. And resilience is also articulated clearly in the climate negotiation as climate adaptive resilience. Now, the question is resilience from whose perspective? That's the fundamental question. Now, if you're bringing that particular person, man, woman, person with disability, or a untouchable that you talked of, the structurally marginalized groups, if you are looking at their resilience, there's only way that you can actually do it, my friend, is trying to address that and not treating disaster as an event and a disaster response as an event festival. So you go there and do it and then come out. That's not how it can actually be done. So it has to be, it is seen to be, unfortunately, as a photo opportunity as well. But we need to actually see the opportunity of bringing those changes. So it is not building back better. I would say it is building forward. Like say, how can we actually integrate that to the sustainable livelihood? How can we actually look at making the life and livelihood resilient? That's the fundamental thing that I was talking of. That's one part, how we actually bring a long-term thinking. Now, the second thing I would like to submit, can we not ask the governments and donors and ourselves to see that disaster risk reduction or risk-informed infrastructure building or development, it becomes an integral part of the recovery or response, and you allocate money for that. Perhaps there is a need to actually talk of what percentage of the money should be allocated for making disaster-free world in each country. So that's the other thing that I was talking of. Now, quickly responding to Guru, my friend, like say, there was attempt in some of the cyclone shelters. They had the base which was actually meant for the livestock, but in other cases it was not done. And that is the point, that we need to actually do all those infrastructure building, which is risk-informed for future shocks. And Sarah, I mean, that's the point. How can we bring risk-informed development work in a protracted conflict crisis? That is still a challenge. But I still would like to actually suggest, propose, and perhaps we will actually argue that we need to see it from the perspective of the people who are actually experiencing it the most. They are the people, they have the solution. And we need to learn to listen to them. We need to learn to see that. And that coherence and that what we are talking of inclusion is not only people's inclusion. Then we need to see how risk-informed is included in global discourse, how it is included in national discourse. Rather than actually giving money here and there, can we put the money in the right place in the budget? So we need to actually see that how that the inclusion happens of the conflict-affected persons, how inclusion happens in the budgetary processes, local level, national level, and global level.
So we are done with our time here, and I know there's more questions. We're willing to stay, but if others need to leave, I want to respect their time. I do want to end, and we'll take more questions, we'll stay, but if anybody needs to leave, I wanted to say that the outcomes and accountability is the question of whom and to whom. We have to be accountable to people if we're really serious about inclusion, and they may not see targets and goals and indicators and deliverables as important unless they're answering to them and their needs. So we have to flip our model. I want to thank these speakers, and we will stay, take more questions. Those of you that wanted to leave, our session is officially over, so time-wise. Thank you. Yeah. All right. Please go ahead, and I believe you had a question up there.
Firstly, thank you very much for not excluding what I wanted to say. Okay, first of all, thank you. So talking about leaving no one behind, I would like to draw your attention, and it's not a question, it's an appeal to the panel and the rest of the people in this room, a group of people who are totally excluded in either in relief assistance or disaster risk reduction. These are both children and others who are either terminally ill or who are at the last stages of their life and who need sometimes pain relief and palliative care. Traditionally, what has happened is that both the humanitarian agencies, including the UN agencies, and the disaster risk reduction communities have never bothered to deal with this group because they always ask this question, why do you want to waste money on children who will anyway die? This has been the traditional approach. However, the 2018 Spear Handbook, which has just come out a few months ago, for the first time has got a section and guidance on how do you do palliative care and pain relief and end-of-life care for children and others in disasters, conflict, and other settings. And I think it's absolutely crucial that when we talk about to leave no one behind, we don't just look at infrastructure, we don't just look at other mechanical and engineering solutions, but also take a compassionate approach to such people. Because if we don't include them, the whole idea of human dignity, because what Spear talks about is that you can't separate out humanitarian assistance, disaster risk reduction, and dignity of people who are affected by disasters and conflict in such settings. So this is an appeal to say that the Spear Handbook actually opens, the small guidance section within the handbook opens a highway for all of us in this room and the rest of the community we represent to make some, I would say, revolutionary change in this sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Jean Dikuna from UN Women. I must thank the speakers for sharing your engagement in and your involvement in disasters. It was a very humbling experience for me to hear that. The Sendai framework, and I think the Kerala presentation did highlight migrants as a vulnerable group. So I did want to ask both Bijay and Professor Menon what your observations were with respect to migrants in the disasters that you have addressed, particularly women migrating out or staying behind, and in what ways did you address that situation? Incoming migrants to Kerala, Orissa, as well as outgoing migrants. Thank you.
You, sir?
Yes, Richard Cotter, Northumbria University Disaster and Development Network, also Amnesty International UK. I was really impressed by the responses to the last round of questions and building on that one now. So one of the things we talk about is accountability to often citizens, but just like the previous questioners, there's a range of people, categories and groups of people who are not always seen as full citizens in the various contexts where they live, they may not have a chance or be allowed to become citizens. And of course, there's different kind of migrants and displaced people. So how do we build the frameworks, the political will in this current global context and in different nations to actually have them fully included and fully part of the participation of assessing the needs and bringing forward solutions which you highlighted at various sort of levels? Thank you.
Thank you for asking that question. That is kind of the question of the day, isn't it? Especially with the time problems we have in recovery. So I'll let any of you answer. Yes, please.
Sorry. I think some of these questions are extremely important, and we need to really address that. We probably need to also recognize that what happened in the World Humanitarian Summit at Istanbul, where the localization agenda and the grand bargain and other frameworks came up, 25% of the funds to go to grassroots organizations and local organizations. Is that really happening in the last three years? We need to ask that question. We need to really make sure that accountability means that we really endorse the commitments which you're making in global platforms. Sendai and all the commitments which have been made, and we have indicators, we have targets, and we are monitoring them. But we need to really make sure that most of those things which we're talking about, policy is a statement of intent. Frameworks are good, leads, and they're all ways by which we will be able to reach a certain direction. But we need to operationalize them, and I think that is a challenge. And to the question about migrant workers in Kerala, we have actually interstate migrant workers have been coming to Kerala for the last several decades, but it has been much more in the recent past, mainly because of the fact that the wage rates in Kerala are very high, and in the many other states like Assam, West Bengal, Bihar, Orissa, we have problems of people who actually have to come out and then earn their wage, earn their employment, and earn their incomes. So we have 35 lakhs, 3.5 million people who are actually interstate migrants who are working in Kerala, mainly because we also have seen over the past 2 decades, we have also seen more than 33 million people going out to the Middle East in search of employment. So we have a shortage of technical manpower, and so we have people coming from other states who are actually working in skilled labor and unskilled labor. So we have seen that during the floods in Kerala in August 2018, this was actually realized that we need to address the problems of that. Kerala has a migrant labor policy. Kerala has actually also set up multi-storied apartments which are actually helping these migrant workers to find accommodation. So they're actually working on addressing issues like insurance, ESI, employees state insurance, and various other such options, which can actually provide them cushions and buffers. Women, definitely, there are special concerns because we have an empowerment policy, we have a women gender equality policy in Kerala. So there are many ways by which these are being addressed by the government of Kerala and also by the government of India and various state governments. And we are using each disaster as a test case for looking at good practices. And we find that whatever is happening in Kerala, we also need to see that this is getting translated and operationalized in Orissa. So Vijay can take it forward.
Just actually quickly, let me just actually take you to Africa. It's a fantastic question. In sub-Saharan African migration, post-drought was one of the critical challenge, where the women were left, men had already gone out, women were given the responsibility of the unpaid care work. So what we did there's quite a group of organizations in sub-Saharan countries. So we actually ensured that the violence against women and girls becomes the key critical part of the response itself. Yeah? And then actually you see how you build the women's leadership that they take over. That is possible. But if I go back to the immediate disasters in Haiti or in Odisha or in tsunami, response in Sri Lanka. Let's say in Odisha, we saw the red light areas, there is number of girls increased there because the girls actually landed up in the red light district. That was actually huge challenge there. And in Kenya, I saw there that the girls were actually married off at the age of 8 or 9 because the family could not take care of them. Yeah? So those are the critical issues. So there is no one solution. I mean, all of us, we agree on that, but there are multiple context-specific solutions which need to see how the women are protected, how the girl children are protected, and the children as such are protected, and how the government not only talks of the policies, but at the same time also implement the policies with the appropriate measures, and civil societies and private sector working there, they actually ensure that they conform to those policies and practices. So that is in line with the CEDAW, in line with violence against women. We actually came up with a policy in Sri Lanka. Together with all the civil society and women, we actually came up with a policy to protect the women during post-disaster context. So there are experiences, I'm sure, coming from you and women, you know far better than what we know. And what Uni asked, I agree with you. They are one of the critical group. The children are one of the critical group who are usually missed. So the inclusion must be taken on board, the children as well. And coming to my friend sitting there, sorry, I didn't get your name. But like, so what you asked, migrant, there's $1 million question, my friend. Let's actually look at that, what is happening, and how this can be actually done to, how can that can be addressed with the stateless people who do not have a citizenship. That's something that we are struggling in Europe. That is something that we are struggling in Bangladesh now. So perhaps I don't think the current arrangement with the UNHCR and IOM, that can actually take care of it. But I will leave it for another day of debate and discussion.
All right, I'd like to thank the speakers, and I'd like to thank all of you who stayed. Leave you with a final thought. Again, on the far right end, it's Mr. Shinichi Takahashi, thank you. Kiyoshi Murakami, thank you. BJ Kumar, and Professor Vinod Menon. Thank you to these speakers so much, and take with you the word agency, a word we didn't have before. We need to empower people to act on their own behalfs, to be agents.
Thank you all. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone, for coming and staying.